For over half a century, the world has swallowed a comfortable, sanitized lie about the day the dragon fell from the sky. We have been told it was a tragedy, a mishap, a twist of fate. But at 65 years old, Jean-Claude Van Damme, the man who walked in Bruce Lee's footsteps, who fought in the same underground kumites, and who became a global icon in the same brutal industry, is finally finished protecting the dark secrets of the machine that nearly consumed him. Van Damme is no longer the young, hungry fighter desperate for a contract. He is an elder statesman, a survivor of the Hong Kong meat grinder. He knows deep in his soul that what transpired on July 20, 1973 was absolutely no accident. It was the inevitable conclusion of a game rigged against the player. Today, the muscles from Brussels steps out of the shadows to ruthlessly expose the machinery of death lurking behind the fame. He is tearing down the curtain to reveal the Triads, the corrupt studios, and the negligence that killed a Superman. The official story is about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Where can the guilty hide when the legend himself finally points the finger? A contract signed in blood. To truly comprehend the death of Bruce Lee, we cannot simply stare at a faded medical report or listen to the rehearsed statements of studio executives. We must plunge into the suffocating pressure cooker of 1970s Hong Kong. This was a treacherous landscape that Jean-Claude Van Damme would later navigate himself, a world where film sets were run by gangsters and contracts were enforced with machetes, not lawyers. Van Damme describes a devil's alliance formed between the transcendent genius of Lee and the ruthless commercial ambition of the Golden Harvest studio, all backed by the invisible, menacing hand of the Triads. In 1973, Bruce Lee was not merely a martial artist or an actor. He was a walking, breathing economy. He had single-handedly smashed the monopoly of the Shaw brothers, the titan that had ruled Asian cinema for decades, and placed Hong Kong on the global map. He was generating millions of dollars in an era when that kind of money drew the most dangerous kind of attention. But this level of seismic disruption creates powerful enemies. Van Damme points to the terrifying physical transformation of Lee in those final, frantic months of 1973. If you look at the footage from Way of the Dragon compared to the final days of Enter the Dragon, the difference is chilling. The dragon had stripped away every ounce of body fat, leaving him gaunt, manic, and vibrating with a nervous energy that bordered on hysteria. His skin was paper-thin. His eyes, usually burning with focus, were darting and paranoid. Was this skeletal appearance the result of his legendary training discipline, as the fan magazines claimed? Or was he being systematically drained by a production schedule that treated him like a prize racehorse rather than a human being? The industry whispers that Van Damme heard decades later paint a haunting picture of a man under siege. Lee was battling crippling headaches that blinded him, rapid weight loss that terrified his wife, and fierce, uncharacteristic temper tantrums on set. He was a man who knew, instinctively, that he was being hunted. In the lawless, brutal world of 1970s Hong Kong cinema, the police were often on the payroll of the syndicates. Lee was openly known to be refusing protection from the local criminal organizations. He was an American citizen, arrogant and independent, who believed he didn't need to pay the tax to the dragon heads. Van Damme notes that in that specific era, refusing the Triads wasn't just a business decision. It was akin to signing your own death warrant. They wouldn't kill you immediately. They would stress you, threaten you, and wait for a moment of weakness. We must scrutinize the terrifying incident on May 10, 1973, just 2 months before his eventual death. This is the forgotten death that predicts the final one. Lee collapsed at the Golden Harvest Studios while dubbing lines for Enter the Dragon. He didn't just faint. He went into fierce convulsions, his body seizing up as if electrified. He was rushed to the Baptist Hospital with acute cerebral edema, massive swelling of the brain, and came within inches of death. The doctors barely saved him using mannitol to reduce the intracranial pressure. He was vomiting, convulsing, and unable to breathe. Any normal human being, any protected asset in a Western studio would have been ordered to take 6 months off. The insurance companies would have shut down the production. But this was Hong Kong. Lee was back on set within days. Why? Who cleared him for duty? Who looked at a man who had just suffered a near-fatal brain event and pushed him back under the blinding studio lights and the intense heat of the sounds? Was it his own relentless drive, or were the investors breathing down his neck, demanding the completion of the film before the distribution deals expired? Van Damme argues that this was the first attempt on his life, or at least, the moment the industry decided he was expendable. Van Damme also highlights the relationship between Lee and Raymond Chow, the powerful head of Golden Harvest. It was complex and rapidly deteriorating. Lee was demanding more money, more creative control, and was secretly planning to take his immense talents back to Hollywood, effectively cutting the Hong Kong studio out of his future billions. He was planning to leave the table while he was winning. In an industry built on absolute control, an asset trying to leave is a dangerous liability. The tension was palpable in the air. Lee was reportedly carrying a gun in his final weeks, fearing for his life. You do not carry a firearm because you are afraid of a migraine. You carry it because you know there are sharks circling the water, waiting for a drop of blood. The environment Lee lived in was one of constant chemical enhancement. To maintain his shredded physique and impossible energy levels, Lee was consuming a cocktail of vitamins, muscle relaxants, and perhaps other substances pushed by handlers to keep the machine running at redline. Van Damme, who battled his own public demons with substances in the 90s, recognizes the tragic pattern. The star is always the last to know they are being poisoned by the very regimen meant to keep them supreme. Was Lee's body failing him naturally, or was he being slowly, methodically weakened to make him easier to control, or easier to remove entirely? The bedroom of death. The timeline of July 20, 1973, remains the most contested 24 hours in the history of martial arts. The official narrative is clean, simple, and according to Van Damme, completely fabricated. The story goes that Bruce Lee went to the apartment of actress Betty Ting Pei to review the script for Game of Death. He complained of a headache, took a painkiller called Equadzic, went to lie down for a nap, and never woke up. But Van Damme, looking at this through the cynical lens of an industry insider who has seen how crime scenes are cleaned up, sees cracks in the plaster wide enough to drive a truck through. The first lie is the location. This is crucial. When the news first broke to the Hong Kong press, Raymond Chow and the studio released a formal statement claiming Lee died at his home in Kowloon Tong, safely in the arms of his wife, Linda, while walking in the garden. Why lie? If it was a tragic natural cause, why the desperate need for deception? Why invent a scenario that didn't happen? The truth only surfaced when intrepid reporters traced the ambulance logs days later and found the pickup address was not Lee's home, but Betty Ting Pei's apartment. This initial cover-up is the smoking gun. It proves that the first instinct of the people in that room was not to save Bruce Lee, but to save their own reputations and the studio's stock price. They knew how it looked, the world's biggest star dead in the bed of his mistress. But beyond the PR disaster, what were they doing in the critical time between finding him unresponsive and calling the ambulance? The timeline suggests a gap where phone calls were made but not to the hospital. Were they cleaning the scene? Were they removing evidence? Or were they simply waiting for the dragon to take his last breath so the problem would be solved? Let's dissect the headache. Lee arrived at Betty's apartment in the early afternoon. Raymond Chow was there discussing the movie before leaving for a dinner meeting with George Lazenby. Lee stayed behind. He complained of a headache, a symptom ominously consistent with his May collapse. Betty gave him Equadzic, a prescription drug containing aspirin and a tranquilizer called meprobamate. The coroner later blamed this single pill for his death. But Bruce Lee was a man who pushed his body to the absolute limit of human endurance. He had taken painkillers before. He was in peak physical condition. He had a tolerance for pain that was superhuman. How does a single tablet kill the fittest man on earth? The delay in medical response is bordering on criminal negligence. Betty Ting Pei tried to wake him at around 7:30 p.m. but couldn't. He was unresponsive. Instead of calling 911 immediately, she called Raymond Chow. Chow drove all the way from the restaurant to the apartment. He entered. He tried to wake Lee. He spent time in the apartment. Then they called a private doctor. Only after the private doctor arrived and failed to revive him did they finally call an ambulance. Valuable life-saving hours were wasted in a bizarre, deadly game of telephone. In a cardiac or cerebral event, minutes are the difference between life and death. Van Damme argues this delay wasn't panic, it was procedure. They were managing the asset, not saving the man. They were calculating the fallout before they even checked his pulse. If they had called the ambulance at 7:30 p.m., Lee might be alive today. Why did they wait? The condition of the room adds another layer to the mystery. It was one of the hottest days of the year in Hong Kong, a humid, stifling heat. Reports suggest the air conditioning was turned off to keep the room quiet for script reading. Lee had famously had his sweat glands under his arms surgically removed to improve his aesthetic on camera. He hated sweat stains on his silk suits. Without the ability to sweat efficiently in a stiflingly hot apartment, could the dragon have suffered from heat stroke? Heat stroke causes brain swelling. It causes confusion. It causes headaches. It is a plausible medical theory, yet it was dismissed quickly in favor of the allergic reaction narrative. Why? Because heat stroke implies negligence on the part of those present. It implies they let him roast to death. An allergic reaction is an act of God. It blames the victim's body. It absolves the people in the room. Furthermore, traces of cannabis were found in Lee's stomach during the autopsy. While medically non-lethal, the media seized on this detail to paint Lee as a drug addict, a reckless hedonist who brought about his own end. Van Damme sees this as a classic smear tactic. By focusing the public's judgment on the marijuana, the studio diverted attention away from the timeline discrepancies, the delay in calling the ambulance, and the inconsistent witness statements. It was a character assassination designed to justify the physical one. The behavior of Betty Ting Pei in the aftermath is equally haunting. She became the most hated woman in Hong Kong, vilified as the woman who killed Bruce Lee. She received death threats. She lived in terror. But was she the villain or just a scapegoat? Was she handed the pill to give to him by someone else? Was she instructed to wait before calling for help? Van Damme wonders if she was a pawn in a much larger game of chess played by the Triads and studio heads. The room where Bruce died was not a sanctuary. It was a trap. And as the ambulance finally screamed through the streets of Kowloon, carrying the cooling body of a legend, the cover-up was already being cemented in concrete. The toxicology of a lie. The death certificate officially reads death by misadventure, a polite British legal phrase that essentially means bad luck. But Jean-Claude Van Damme calls it a judicial insult to the memory of a warrior. The autopsy of Bruce Lee, performed at Queen Elizabeth Hospital, uncovered a brain that was swollen, angry, and inexplicably heavy. His brain weight had increased from an average 1,400 grams to 1,575 grams, an increase of nearly 13%. To visualize this, imagine a sponge soaked in water, expanding until it crushes itself against the rigid walls of the skull. This pressure shut down his respiratory centers. He suffocated from the inside out. But here is where the science violently clashes with the story told by the studio. The pathologist claimed this was a hypersensitive reaction, an allergy to the equagic pill, specifically to the meprobamate component. However, forensic experts and medical professionals for over 50 years have pointed out a glaring inconsistency. Fatal allergic reactions to meprobamate are statistically microscopic. They are incredibly rare. And more importantly, they are almost always accompanied by other visible signs: anaphylactic shock, extreme swelling of the throat, closing of the airways, or a visible rash on the skin. Bruce Lee had none of these. His throat was open. His skin was clear. He just went to sleep and his brain quietly destroyed itself. This lack of peripheral symptoms screams of something else, something targeted: poison. In the dark annals of Chinese history and triad warfare, the use of slow-acting or untraceable poisons is well documented. It is an art form. There are herbal toxins, derived from plants like gelsemium or heavy metals, that can cause organ failure, heart attack, or cerebral edema without leaving a chemical footprint that 1970s toxicology could easily detect. Van Damme posits a chilling theory that many insiders have whispered but few dare to say on camera. Was the painkiller actually a delivery system for a hit? If Lee was refusing to pay the Triads, or worse, threatening to leave Golden Harvest and take his earning power to Hollywood, he was worth more dead than alive. Alive, he was a difficult, litigious, independent force who was about to leave Hong Kong behind. Dead, he was a legend that could be monetized forever. The financial motive is undeniable and grotesque. Immediately after his death, Enter the Dragon exploded, becoming one of the highest-grossing films of all time. The studio didn't have to deal with a demanding, perfectionist star anymore. They didn't have to negotiate royalties. They had the footage. They had the rights. They butchered his unfinished masterpiece, Game of Death, using cardboard cutouts, body doubles, and archive footage to squeeze every last dollar out of his corpse. It was a cinematic desecration. If Lee had lived, he would have sued them into oblivion for ruining his vision. Dead, he was the perfect employee, silent, profitable, and compliant. Then there is the curse. We cannot talk about Bruce without talking about Brandon. 20 years later, the darkness came for his son, Brandon Lee, killed on the set of The Crow by a prop gun that mysteriously contained a real bullet fragment lodged in the barrel. Van Damme was working in Hollywood at the time. He remembers the shockwave that hit the action movie community. What are the statistical odds? A father dies of a mysterious brain swelling at 32. A son dies of a freak shooting accident at 28. Two generations of dragons, both on the verge of global superstardom, both extinguished in freak accidents. Is it a curse? Or is it a vendetta? In the underworld code, wiping out a bloodline is the ultimate punishment. It ensures no one is left to ask questions. It ensures no one is left to seek revenge. The death of Brandon silenced the resurgence of the Lee name just as it was about to conquer the world again. Van Damme, a father himself, finds this possibility too horrific to contemplate, yet too consistent to ignore. Van Damme also highlights the suspicious handling of the body immediately after death. The rush to embalm Lee, done very quickly, made independent toxicology testing in America impossible. The formaldehyde destroys the chemical traces in the blood. The evidence was literally washed away. The glass he drank from at Betty's apartment, never secured. The police investigation treated it as a celebrity mishap, not a potential homicide. There was no yellow tape. There was no interrogation of the powerful men who managed him. It was a closed shop. Even the theory of heat stroke, recently popularized by medical journals in 2022, doesn't fully exonerate the people in the room. If he was suffering from heat stroke, confused, hot, complaining of a headache, why give him a sedative? Why put him to bed in a warm room under a duvet? That is medically the exact opposite of what you should do. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. Whether it was murder by poison or manslaughter by gross negligence, the result is the same. The dragon was failed by everyone around him. The autopsy results are not a period at the end of a sentence. They are a giant question mark burned into history. The swelling of the brain was the mechanism of death, but the trigger remains the subject of the biggest cover-up in entertainment history. Van Damme looks at the cold facts and sees a deliberate obfuscation of the truth. They blamed a pill. They blamed cannabis. They blamed his own biology. They blamed everyone and everything except the system that drove him into that grave. The meat grinder, eating the legend. Stepping back from the microscopic details of July 1973, Jean-Claude Van Damme asks us to look at the macro picture. Bruce Lee's death is not an anomaly. It is a feature of the entertainment industry. It is the archetype of the sacrificial star. We saw it with Marilyn Monroe. We saw it with Elvis Presley. We saw it with Michael Jackson. The machine finds a generational talent, someone with a light so bright it blinds the world. It isolates them. It extracts every ounce of value from their body and soul. And when the human being inside starts to break under the pressure, the machine doesn't hit the brakes. It accelerates. It ensures the asset and drives until the wheels fall off. Van Damme admits he nearly became a statistic himself in the 90s. He knows the visceral feeling of the yes men circling like vultures. He knows the doctors who provide pills to wake you up and pills to put you to sleep, simply to keep the production schedule on track. He knows the producers who insure your life for millions more than you are worth alive. In Lee's case, the exploitation continued long after his heart stopped beating. The funeral in Hong Kong was a media circus. Thousands of people lined the streets. But look at the faces of the executives in the front row. Were they grieving a friend? Or were they planning the re-release of his catalog? The incomplete footage of his films was stitched together in a way that mocked his perfectionism. Game of Death, released in 1978, is a testament to greed, using actual footage of Bruce Lee's funeral in the movie itself. Imagine the disrespect. Using the real corpse of the star to sell tickets to his own exploitation film. Why has the truth been hidden for over 50 years? Why in 2026 are we still debating this? Because the implications are too dangerous. If it was a Triad hit, admitting it would stain the legacy of Hong Kong cinema forever, revealing it as an industry built on the foundation of organized crime. It would implicate powerful families who are still influential today. If it was studio negligence, it would destroy the reputations of men who are now regarded as titans of cinema history. It is safer to sell the curse. It is safer to sell the mystery. Mysteries sell t-shirts, posters, and video games. Murder investigations send powerful people to prison. Mysteries are romantic, manslaughter is ugly. We must also consider the cultural impact. Bruce Lee was a threat to the global status quo. He was an Asian man becoming the biggest star in the Western world, shattering stereotypes and demanding equality. He was too loud, too strong, and too independent. He refused to play the role of the subservient sidekick. He wanted to be the boss. There were forces on both sides of the Pacific, in Hollywood and in Hong Kong, that were uncomfortable with the power he wielded. Van Damme suggests that Lee was a disruptor who was neutralized. In 2026, we have the hindsight to see the pattern clearly. The death of the dragon was a warning to every star that followed. You are a product. Do not think you are bigger than the studio. Do not think you can fight the system. Van Damme's survival is a miracle, but Lee's death was a mathematical certainty in an equation written by greed. The industry didn't just let Bruce Lee die. They created the conditions where his survival was impossible. And 50 years later, they are still cashing the checks written in his blood. An immortal ghost, justice beyond the grave. So where does this leave the legacy of the greatest martial artist who ever lived? Jean-Claude Van Damme stands today as a survivor, an old lion looking back at the fallen dragon. He speaks not with anger, but with a profound, melancholic clarity. The official story of a headache pill is a fairy tale for children. It is a bedtime story told to keep us from looking under the bed. The reality is a grim tapestry of exhaustion, exploitation, and likely execution. Bruce Lee did not just die, he was extinguished. The files may be unsealed and the theories may be proven by modern science or AI analysis, but justice is a ghost. The men who might have ordered the hit or watched him die are mostly gone. The studio heads have passed away. The Triad bosses of the 70s are dust. But the truth matters. It matters because Bruce Lee was a father, a husband, and a human being, not just a poster on a wall or a character in a video game. He was a man who wanted to show the world that an Asian man could be a hero. Van Damme's final warning to the next generation is simple. Do not worship the industry that creates your heroes, for it is the same beast that destroys them. Fame is a cage, and the higher you fly, the less air there is to breathe. The dragon sleeps in Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle next to his son. But the questions are awake. They will never sleep until the full truth is acknowledged. If you believe the truth deserves to be told, share this video. Do not let the silence win. Subscribe and join the fight for the truth. The legend is immortal, but the man deserves justice.